10 days, 4 astronauts flew around the moon, the first people to do that in over 50 years. But none of it would matter if they couldn't survive the final, most dangerous part of the whole trip, a blazing 25,000-mile-per-hour plummet back to Earth.
And that really is the heart of this story, because this wasn't just any routine re-entry. The crew, the team back in mission control, they all knew there was a big question mark hanging over the Orion spacecraft's heat shield, a problem that could turn this triumphant return into an absolute catastrophe.
13 minutes. That's it. That was the whole window of time, from the moment the Orion capsule slammed into the atmosphere until it was supposed to be floating safely in the Pacific Ocean. As the flight director put it, it's 13 minutes where every single thing has to go exactly right.
So, where did all this worry come from?
Well, it all dates back to the dress rehearsal, the uncrewed test flight Artemis I. See, this wasn't a last-minute surprise. It was a known flaw, and the entire mission really hinged on whether NASA's engineers had figured out a way to outsmart it.
This right here shows you just how big the gap was between what they expected and what actually happened. When the Artemis I capsule came back in 2022, the engineers were just stunned. Instead of some nice even wear, they found over 100 spots where the heat shield material had charred and just flaked off. The very shield that was supposed to protect the next crew was nowhere near as tough as they thought. And that brings us right back to this quote. I mean, can you imagine being in mission control, knowing what happened on Artemis I, while you watch 4 people hurtle towards the planet? The pressure must have been absolutely immense. There was just no room for error.
Instead of hitting the brakes and spending years redesigning the shield, NASA came up with a totally different kind of fix. It wasn't about hardware, it was all about physics. A really brilliant, elegant solution that was, honestly, the opposite of what you'd expect. They called it the slingshot solution. And what's so cool is that it didn't just affect the re-entry. It was baked into the entire flight plan, designed from day one to be as safe and efficient as possible. So the mission used what's called a free return trajectory. Picture it like a giant cosmic figure eight. The spacecraft doesn't just circle the moon, it swings around the far side, and the moon's own gravity literally grabs it and slingshots it back towards us. It's a fantastic passive safety feature. It means even if your main engine fails, you're still on a path home.
So here's that counterintuitive part. The problem on Artemis I happened because gas got trapped under the charring outer layer of the shield. So the fix wasn't to try and minimize the heat, the solution was to apply it more consistently. The idea was to keep that outer layer so hot that gas never even had a chance to get trapped underneath.
To pull that off, they had to completely change how they came back to Earth. Artemis II was planned to come in at a much steeper angle than the first mission. This would make the whole re-entry shorter, hotter, but much more consistent. Exactly what they needed to keep that shield stable. Okay, so the plan was set. The theory was solid. The only thing left to do was to actually execute it. The entire world was watching as the Orion capsule, which the crew had named Integrity, began its final fiery descent.
Let's walk through it. At 7:33 p.m., the service module breaks away, leaving the crew capsule flying solo. 20 minutes later, it hits the top of the atmosphere, and that's when an agonizing 6-minute radio silence begins, as a sheath of plasma cuts off all communication. Then, right on cue, the drogue chutes pop out to slow them down, followed by the 3 giant main parachutes, and at 8:07 p.m., splashdown. History.
And the forces we're talking about here are just staggering. We're talking about a speed of almost 25,000 miles an hour. Temperatures outside hitting 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, that's hot enough to melt steel, all while the crew is getting pinned to their seats by nearly 4 Gs of force. It's just incredible. And then, after all that tension, you hear the words from Mission Control that everyone on Earth was waiting for. We see 3 good-looking parachutes. That was the moment. The first visual confirmation that the capsule had made it through the inferno and was on its final, gentle ride down to the ocean. Moments later, a perfect splashdown right in the Pacific. That clever engineering solution had worked like a charm. The crew was safe, the mission was a complete and total success. But the work wasn't over yet. A perfectly choreographed recovery operation immediately swung into action. You had Navy divers moving in, attaching an inflatable raft they call the front porch right to the hatch. One by one, the astronauts came out, got hoisted by helicopter over to the USS John P. Murtha, and the capsule itself was carefully brought right into the ship.
This incredible homecoming was so much more than just the end of one mission. It was really the final hurdle, the last big step clearing the way for humanity to finally go back to the moon.
And what a crew to do it. You had Commander Reed Wiseman leading a crew of absolute trailblazers. Christina Koch, the first woman ever to fly a lunar mission, Victor Glover, the first person of color to fly a lunar mission, and Jeremy Hansen, the first non-American ever to leave low Earth orbit. Just historic. When you boil it all down, the success of Artemis II comes down to this. It proved the hardware is ready, it proved the plans work, and it proved that Orion can safely take astronauts to the moon and, most importantly, bring them home again. It was the final checkout before we take that next giant leap, landing. So that perfect splashdown wasn't really an ending, was it? It was a beginning. With Orion systems now flight-proven with a crew on board, the path is finally clear for future Artemis missions to land on the moon, and maybe one day, to look even further.